It's April 2025, and the US-China trade war is hotter than ever. President Trump's latest tariff salvo, up to 145% on Chinese goods, has hit Beijing like a freight train. From steel to electronics, Chinese exports are taking a beating, and the ripple effects are shaking global markets. But the real bombshell: whispers that China's closest allies are starting to turn their backs on Xi Jinping, leaving his economy in a tailspin. Let's unpack this. Here's the deal. Trump's tariffs, announced in March 2025, are the toughest yet. They target $400 billion in Chinese imports, with rates as high as 145% on everything from EVs to semiconductors. China fired back with 125% tariffs on US goods. But the damage is uneven. China's economy was already wobbling. Growth slowed to 4.5% last quarter, the lowest in years. Now, exports, which make up 20% of China's GDP, are down 15% since the tariffs hit. That's billions in lost revenue, and it's hurting. But it's not just numbers. Posts on X are buzzing with claims that China's economy is collapsing, with some users pointing to protests in major cities like Shanghai and Guangzhou. Others say Xi Jinping's grip is slipping as his policies falter. Now these claims are inconclusive. No hard evidence of widespread unrest or a full economic collapse. But the sentiment's loud, and it's fueled by real pain. Chinese factories are laying off workers, and companies like Huawei are struggling to source chips under US sanctions. Why is this hitting so hard? China's been the world's factory for decades, but Trump's tariffs are making its goods too expensive for Western markets. At the same time, US allies like Japan and South Korea are diversifying supply chains, moving production to places like Vietnam and India. Even Chinese airlines are rejecting Boeing jets, a move some say is retaliation, but others see as a sign of cash flow problems. And here's the kicker. All this comes as China faces a property crisis, with giants like Evergrande still teetering and a stock market that's down 20% since January. The narrative on X, that US tariffs are collapsing China's economy, might be exaggerated, but there's no denying Xi's under pressure. And that brings us to the allies part. Are they really turning against him? Let's find out. The idea that China's allies are ditching Xi Jinping is lighting up X, with users claiming countries like Russia, North Korea, and even BRICS partners are turning against him. The title of today's video leans into that buzz, but is it true or just wishful thinking from tariff fans? Let's dig into it. First, let's talk about who China's allies are. The big ones are Russia, North Korea, Iran, and BRICS nations like India, Brazil, and South Africa. These countries have backed China's push for a multipolar world, often siding with Xi against Western policies. But cracks are showing. Take Russia, China's biggest partner since the Ukraine war. Trade between them hit $240 billion in 2024. But Russia's economy is also struggling under sanctions. Some analysts say Russia's leaning on China for cheap goods. Not exactly a loyal ally move. Then there's India. As a BRICS member, India's supposed to be Team Xi, but it's been cozying up to the US lately. In March 2025, India signed a $10 billion trade deal with the US for tech and renewables, and it's been quiet on China's tariff complaints. Brazil and South Africa? They're still trading with China, but they're also hedging bets, striking deals with Europe and the US to offset tariff chaos. No one's publicly turned against Xi, but they're not exactly rushing to his defense either. What about smaller allies like North Korea or Iran? They're still in China's corner, but they're not economic heavyweights. North Korea's a black hole for trade, and Iran's oil exports are under US sanctions, limiting their help. Posts on X claim even these allies are fed up with Xi's economic woes. But there's no solid proof, just speculation. So are allies turning against Xi? Not quite. It's more like they're playing both sides, protecting their own economies as China stumbles. But perception matters. When X users say allies are abandoning China, it amplifies the idea that Xi's losing clout. And that narrative's a win for Trump, who's framing tariffs as a knockout punch. Speaking of Trump, let's see how he's playing this. Donald Trump's been touting tariffs as the key to bringing wealth back to America, and right now he's looking like the guy holding the winning hand. But what does this mean for the US, China, and the global stage? Let's break it down. Trump's tariffs aren't just about economics, they're about power. By hitting China with 145% duties, he's trying to cripple their export machine and force companies to move production to the US or allied countries. And it's working, sort of. Apple's shifting some iPhone assembly to India, and Tesla's eyeing Mexico for new plants. US manufacturing added 50,000 jobs in Q1 2025, a small but real win. Trump's team says this is just the start. But here's the catch. Tariffs are a double-edged sword. They're driving up prices for Americans. Think 10-20% more for electronics and clothes. Gas prices are up 15 cents a gallon in some states, partly because of trade disruptions. A JP Morgan report says US inflation could hit 3.5% by year end, and there's a 40% chance of a recession if the trade war escalates. So while Trump's crowing about collapsing China's economy, the US isn't exactly unscathed. Globally, the impact's huge. China's loss is India's gain, with their economy projected to grow 7% this year, partly from trade shifts. Europe's scrambling to avoid getting caught in the crossfire, and smaller nations like Vietnam are cashing in on factory relocations. But if China's economy keeps sliding, it could drag down global growth. Bad news for everyone. And what about Xi? He's not sitting idle. China's pumping $500 billion into stimulus, think infrastructure and green energy, to shore up its economy. They're also pushing for stronger BRICS trade to bypass Western markets. But with tariffs biting and allies hedging, Xi's running out of easy fixes. The ex-buzz about protests and martial law might be overblown, but it shows the world's watching China's next move. Alright, let's get real. Are China's allies really turning against Xi? And is the US actually collapsing China's economy? Here's my take. On the allies front, it's less betrayal and more pragmatism. Countries like Russia and India aren't dumping Xi, they're just covering their bases. China's still a massive market, and BRICS isn't falling apart. But Xi's influence is taking a hit as allies prioritize their own economies. That's not a collapse, it's a wake-up call. As for China's economy, collapse is a stretch. Yes, tariffs are hurting, exports are down, factories are slowing, and the yuan's at a 2-year low. But China's got $3 trillion in foreign reserves and a knack for adapting. They survived Trump's first trade war in 2018. They'll likely weather this one, though not without pain. The real risk? If domestic unrest grows or allies drift further, Xi's leadership could face questions. For the US, tariffs are a gamble. They're boosting some jobs and weakening China, but higher prices and recession fears are real. Trump's betting he can outlast Xi, but it's a high-stakes game. My take: China's down but not out, and the US needs to play smart to avoid shooting itself in the foot. This isn't over yet. And that's the story, folks. US tariffs are hitting China hard. Allies are wobbling, and Xi's feeling the heat. Is this the end of China's dominance or just a bump in the road? I want your take. Drop a comment. Are tariffs saving America or hurting us? Think Xi's days are numbered? And if you're loving US updates, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell to stay in the loop. Big thanks to our US Updates crew for keeping it real. We'll be back tomorrow with more news you need to know. Until then, stay sharp, stay curious, and I'll see you on the next one.